Welcome to Newshour. Canada's next Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has promised to win the trade war against US President Donald Trump following his comprehensive victory in the Liberal leadership election to replace Justin Trudeau. Well, the 59-year-old ex-central banker won the race with 86% of the vote. Mr. Carney will now be sworn in just a few days' time. Nick Harper is in Washington and sent this report.
Well, Guy, Mark Carney did not hold back in his victory speech, using much of it to attack US President Donald Trump. Since returning to the White House 7 weeks ago, the US leader has imposed steep 25% tariffs on Canada, although they currently remain on pause until the start of next month. There was fighting talk from Canada's Prime Minister-designate, who told the crowd in Ottawa Americans should make no mistake. In trade, as in hockey, Canada will win. He labelled President Trump's tariffs unjustified, saying his American counterpart was attacking Canadian workers, families and businesses. Canada is the US's largest trading partner, but Mark Carney said the president's apparent determination for a trade war meant Canada could no longer trust America. He promised Canada's retaliatory tariffs would remain in place until the US scrapped its duties on Canadian goods. He's also wading into the row started by President Trump about Canada becoming the US's 51st state. On that, Carney said that Canada would never ever be part of America in any way, shape or form. Mr. Carney beat 3 rivals to become the leader of the Liberal Party, and with it, Canada's next Prime Minister. But he faces a difficult general election in the coming weeks. He previously served as the governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. Now, his most pressing challenge, even before he can consider the looming election, is dealing with the threat President Trump continues to pose to Canada's economy and sovereignty. Nick Harper for A News in Washington, D.C.
Well, staying in Washington now, let's dig into this a little bit deeper with our very own Ube Shah-Banda. Ube, always good to speak to you. Give us your analysis then on what happens next in terms of this US-Canadian trade war. And are there any prospects at all for a positive Carney-Trump relationship?
Well, relations between US and its longtime strategic ally to the north, Canada, are at a crossroads. And after a decade of being in power, Prime Minister Trudeau bid a teary farewell, with Mark Carney being selected as the new Prime Minister of Canada, with the Liberal Party choosing him to lead following the Justin Trudeau era. Look, Carney, should be noted, received a overwhelming mandate from the Liberal Party. According to reports, 85% of Liberal Party members voted for Carney. And that might be a reaction to the turbulence between what was once a smooth relationship between Canada and the United States, as President Trump has been pushing for retaliatory tariffs on Canada, and Canada itself retaliating, putting tariffs on electricity being provided to the United States. And of course, Washington, D.C. still insisting that millions of Americans are being killed by fentanyl that is being smuggled into the U.S., both from the Canadian border and from the Mexican border. And so Carney is going to having a strong mandate. He is going to be jumping in with, in that leadership position with one country in mind, the U.S. So much of Canada's economy, particularly its energy exports, go to its southern neighbor. And it'll be very interesting to see, once Carney has his call with President Trump, how that call goes. We have seen these previous calls between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau, like the one last week, did not go very well. While on one hand, President Trump's administration has delayed some of the tariffs on Canada, at least until April 2nd, with President Trump's economic advisors saying that there needs to be some exemptions for the spare parts and the supply chain for American auto manufacturers. Otherwise, it's going to significantly increase prices on vehicles and make it much more difficult for American manufacturers. President Trump has said that while he may delay the imposition of most of these tariffs for another few weeks, he is still very much intent on, as President Trump says, treating other countries the way they treat us when it comes to trade. And of course, the fentanyl issue being declared by the Trump administration as a major national security concern. So it'll be interesting to see if Carney tries to take a more conciliatory approach. But while on one hand, he did win with a mandate saying that, there's this new sentiment of a Canada first that seems to be emerging here, with many Canadians who are patriotic firmly opposing even the prospect of annexation by the U.S. and wanting a strong leader who would stand up to the U.S. So it's going to be a very difficult balancing act for Carney, because at the same time, retaliatory tariffs on Canada are going to impact inflation and cost of living in that country, which are major issues of concern. So a great deal on the plate of the new Prime Minister of Canada that he's inherited. But on the other hand, it's new leadership in Canada. So perhaps with a new personality, somebody who is not Prime Minister Trudeau, that might offer an off-ramp to the ongoing tensions between the United States and Canada.
Well, let's bring in another familiar face to NewsHour viewers. Anita Sharma joins us now. Anita, thanks very much for joining us. Let's look at this then. Mr. Carney has won. What now? How soon will a general election happen? And what's your sense of what's the most urgent things to do on that to-do list for this PM to be?
Well, great to be with you again on NewsHour, Guy, and to be with the A News family once again. Look, it wasn't a surprise that he won. He got 86% of the Liberal Party members' vote on Sunday. He becomes the first leader without cabinet experience, but he's got a number of firsts, right? If you go through this gentleman's resume, it is nothing short of outstanding. It's like he was born to be the leader of Canada. In fact, throughout my whole career as a business news anchor, political analyst, commentator, journalist, we covered Mark Carney quite extensively. And the question in Canada was always not if he would run for the top job, but when he would run. Well, it took some time. Let me first start with a background of Mark Carney, Guy, 59 years of age, born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, nowhere close to Toronto, if folks are trying to figure out where that is. Former Goldman Sachs banker, former Bank of England governor, the first non-Brit to hold that posting, which he grabbed in 2013. BOE, reaching out to him, I should mention. Former Bank of Canada governor from 2008. So that was before the Bank of England appointment. His profile is similar to that of another famous central banker who also went on to become a prime minister, and that would be an Italian by the name of Mario Draghi. So a stellar resume. I can quickly touch on his educational background. He went to Harvard. He played ice hockey at Harvard. That is incredible, especially for a Canadian. If you want to win the heart of a Canadian, there you go. He also went to Oxford, and I believe his wife is of British origin. So all of that should settle any question whatsoever if he's ready or willing or capable of handling this job. Now, the timing of his appointment, the timing of him coming into the leadership race, winning the leadership race is very, very interesting, because up until U.S. President Donald Trump started attacking, that's essentially what he's doing, is attacking Canada with remarks about Canada becoming the 51st state, starting the tariffs, giving Canada reprieve on tariffs alongside Mexico and China, but warning after warning, assault after assault. Before this had happened, it was pretty much a shoo-in that the Conservative Party of Canada, with Pierre Poilievre at the helm, would become the governing party of Canada. But when Trump started this back and forth with Canada. Our current Prime Minister, well, as of yesterday, I guess, Justin Trudeau, a long-standing Prime Minister of Canada for more than a decade, he was trading those barbs, right, back and forth with Donald Trump. When he announced his resignation in January, that's when Mark Carney stepped up and said, okay, folks, I'm coming home and I'm ready to become the next Prime Minister of Canada. So it's a fascinating time. And the polls you mentioned, again, up until the tariff battle began, the Conservatives were well ahead of the Liberals. The Canadians from coast to coast to coast were fed up with the Liberal Party. They had governed, like I said, for more than a decade. Canadians worried about rising costs, just worried about inflationary issues, not being able to afford a home in Canada. I know that's not a problem that's unique only to Canada, but this is what Canadians were going to vote on. They thought, we're going to finally turn towards the Conservatives, see if we can get some sort of reprieve. The tariff battle ensued with Donald Trump, and now everyone is looking squarely at Carney. So much so, Guy, the polls, while it doesn't look like the Liberals are leading at any point, they have certainly shrunk that huge gap. It was a double-digit lead that the Conservatives had prior to the tariff spat, and now we're looking at low single digits.
Well, Anita, it's fascinating, as you say. And he's had this incredibly distinguished career. It would almost be hard to beat, to find a CV that's any better. You know, Oxford, Harvard, distinguished career in banking, both retail banking and obviously central banking. But he is a relative newcomer to politics, isn't he? And he's also been called a numbers man, even the boring guy. You know, so how easy will it be for him to transition from stellar professional into world leader?
Great question. So like I said, prior to the Trump tariff battle, I don't think Canadians, much like what you're seeing happen around the world, I don't think Canadians had an appetite for another so-called bureaucrat, let's say, central bank governor twice over, like you said, Ivy League resume, Oxford as well as Harvard, didn't have an appetite for it. But now that we see what's transpiring, when I say we, I'm also speaking as a Canadian, right? Now that we see what's transpiring south of the border from Canada's perspective with the United States of America, with this Trump administration, which at the beginning, many thought, okay, is this a joke? We know Trump likes to punch hard. There's always rhetoric involved. But now Canadian officials, from what I hear, from what my sources are telling me, is they're taking this very, very seriously. They're taking Trump at his word. So to your point, Carney basically came out and said, look, and he took a shot at Pierre Poilievre as well. He said, Canadians need crisis management skills. Canadians need negotiating skills. He says he's proven that time and time again. When he was with the Bank of England, he was at the onset, we were at the onset of the pandemic. He helped Brexit through the sharp crash with the pound. He was there for that. The 2008 banking crisis, he was a governor of the Bank of Canada when that happened. So as far as crises management is concerned, I don't think anyone would doubt his skills. Negotiating with Trump, well, he was with the G20 leaders, I believe, at a meeting when Trump actually walked out, when he was upset with the International Monetary Fund. At that time, he was the chairman of the Financial Stability Board, an international economic body, as you may know. So he's had his, maybe not direct run-ins with Trump, but he's been there when Trump has basically spoken out about what seems to concern him in his first administration. So no stranger to Trump in the first term. Obviously on the G20 side, not as a leader of a country, but this man is not afraid of firsts, right? Like I said, maybe a bureaucrat isn't what Canadians signed up for pre-tariff spat, but it looks like the situation that Canada is in right now, they're going to lean on Carney. I'd be remiss, Guy, if I didn't talk a little bit more about his international experience. He mentioned it in his leadership acceptance speech on Sunday. He said, look, I want to expand our partnership. We have to look past the United States. The United States, for decades, Guy, has been Canada's #1 trading partner. He says That party is essentially over. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But now we have a man who's got experience with the Bank of England, has experience with British legislators, politicians. He has experience with Europe. He has experience with the United Nations. In fact, he left his position as a U.S. Special Envoy on climate action to basically come back to Canada and take on this role as Liberal leader and some say most likely the next Prime Minister of Canada.
It's very interesting, isn't it? As you say, Anita, in many senses, he is the polar opposite of President Trump. He's held positions pushing forward the climate agenda. He's also someone who is very much a regular at events like Davos and other multilateral events around the world. So, as you say, he's not afraid of President Trump, but actually he may have a lot to thank President Trump for, because certainly, as you say, this rhetoric does seem to have united Canadians and also perhaps made voters think again about the Liberal Party.
Yeah, he made an interesting analogy, right? He said that we didn't ask for this fight. I'm quoting here. We didn't ask for this fight, but Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves. He's of course alluding to hockey here. Like I said, nothing gets Canadians more revved up than chatter about hockey. He also called Trump a bully. So he's showing a little bit of toughness at a time that Canadians really need that. So it looks like, could be wrong, but it looks like this gentleman he already knows he's got the bureaucratic background, right? He already knows he has the polish, he has the CV, or the resume. But what Canadians didn't know, what they were afraid of prior to his acceptance speech, was would he have the fire? Would he have that ability to match Trump? I don't think he's going to match Trump in terms of being outspoken at the microphone or on social media channels, but just coming to the leadership acceptance speech and outright calling out Trump, naming him as a bully, that says a lot. So it's going to be a very interesting time to see where this all goes. If the polls continue to move in the direction they do, within days or weeks, we could see the momentum shift even more with respect to polling. You asked me off the top, when could an election be called? Not sure if I answered that, but I'll answer it now. They had until the end of October. The Liberals had until the end of October to call an election. But it looks like, to your point, and to the point I made earlier, with this huge momentum shift that we're seeing toward the Liberal Party, no one saw this coming, not even the Liberals. But to see this massive momentum behind the Liberals, it looks like we could see an election called within days, if not weeks. But it looks like it's going to happen imminently, Guy.
And Anita, with this election looming, as you say, the Conservatives may have been caught off guard by this unexpected shift in momentum. What do the Conservatives need to do now to try and regain the upper hand?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So in Pierre Poilievre, you speak about career-long bureaucrats or legislators. He's been with the Conservative. He's a young man. He's in his 40s, but he's been with the Conservative Party for, I believe, over 2 decades. He got his start very early. Like Mark Carney, who, while he was born in Northwest Territories, was raised in Alberta, according to his profile. Pierre Poilievre was also raised in Alberta. Now that's very critical, right? Because Alberta is the stranglehold, the stronghold, if you will, for conservatism in Canada. That's where Conservatives always traditionally do very well. Pierre Poilievre was the shoo-in. He was the man to replace Justin Trudeau. Now that you have Mark Carney coming to the forefront with all this great experience, this is experience that Pierre Poilievre does not have. He headed straight to Ottawa after his time in Alberta as an MP, member of parliament. So he spent all his time as a political insider, which you would think would have helped him at this point. But when you have Trump on a much larger stage, doing something that I have to say as a Canadian now as well, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this. And I know it's caught everyone off guard. well, you now have this interesting situation playing out where once again, it looks like Canada's governing party, the Liberals, have been given this four-leaf clover, this pot of gold, if you will. I know we're approaching St. Patrick's Day in about a week's time, but it looks like the Irish and the Liberal Party can thank their lucky stars for what's about to happen, which is presumably a Liberal victory when and if the election's called. Well, we know it'll be called. Question is when.
Well, yeah, the Liberals thanking their lucky stars. Anita, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks ever so much for your analysis, as always.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you very much, Anita. Always great to hear your analysis. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of NewsHour. Please do stay with us for more news and analysis. And from all of us here in Baku, thank you for watching.